The president is the most important person in the whole country.
We need a president who will be a steady, conservative hand at the wheel.
A president who has that special quality of leadership.
A president who understands the price of freedom.
We need a president who will be a strong role model.
Who's not afraid to speak out on our values.
Cutting taxes and balancing the budget.
And creating good-paying jobs.
One day, I'm going to be president, and I want the country in good shape when I take over.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the next President of the United States, Bob Dole.
Why did I fall in love with Bob Dole? Well, it didn't hurt that he was the most handsome and strongest man I'd ever met, and probably the funniest.
The number one way to balance a budget, Arkansas, sell it.
But there's really so much about Bob that people don't know. His story is really the American story. Triumph over adversity, love of family, commitment to a core set of beliefs that have been tested in the toughest situations imaginable. To understand Bob Dole, you have to realize that Bob grew up in a family that had a lot of love, but not much else. For a long time, I didn't know this, but for years during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl days, his entire family lived in the basement of their little house on Maple Street and rented out the upstairs so that they could make ends meet. His mom and dad, Bob, his brother Kenny, and his two sisters, Gloria and Norma Jean. And you have to understand what Bob was like before the war. Athletics was such a big part of his life. He was a football and basketball star, but also loved to run. And though he wasn't a great runner naturally, he worked at it until he set the local record in the half mile. That same kind of dedication and discipline has been evident his entire life.
As a young man in a small town, my parents taught me to put trust in God, not government, and never confuse the two. Something else I learned the hard way, that while self-reliance is an essential part of the American character, so is the spirit of community that reaches out to those wounded in body or soul. I joined the 10th Mountain Division as a second lieutenant platoon leader, and it was on April 14th when our platoon was assigned and directed to take Hill 913. We tried to advance. I remember my radio man, Corporal Sims, being hit. I remember dragging him back into a foxhole. Then I remember trying to move up a little bit, and then I felt a sting in my shoulder. Some high explosive bullet entered my right shoulder, fractured my vertebra in my neck. I saw these things racing. My parents, my house. I couldn't move my body. I couldn't move my arms, my legs.
No one really thought he would live. But young Second Lieutenant Bob Dole refused to give up. Then no one thought he would ever walk again.
Bob was paralyzed for a year. He went away to war a star athlete, 190 pounds of muscle, and came back at 120 pounds, and some said he'd never get out of bed. But they, the experts, didn't understand what a man like Bob Dole was made of.
When I went off to war, it was to defend a community of values unique in all the world. I came back sustained by the love and generosity of friends and neighbors who renewed my sense of life's possibilities. I went around looking for a miracle that'd make me whole again. Then I heard of this doctor in Chicago, Dr. Kalikian, great Armenian orthopedic surgeon who'd served in the service, who lost a brother there and would do anything for veterans. And he didn't, I remember going to see him. He wanted to help. He wanted to operate on my arms, my hand, to see if he could get some action in my right hand. And my shoulder was fused. It was sort of like this, where I couldn't move it at all. He wanted to at least make it flail so it'd come back to my side and maybe get a little more use. The end result was that I didn't have any money, he didn't want any money, but we had to pay the hospital bill.
With the help of Russell, Bob Dole fought back.
The VFW in Russell, Kansas, with a friend of mine, Phil Rupenthal, started to raise money. And they raised about $1,800, and they did it with this little cigar box that Elizabeth has here. And I still have some of the deposit slips. They're 50 cents, they're $15, 45 cents. Some people I'd never heard of, but most of them I knew when I carried the papers and paper route or mowed their lawns or something growing up as a kid.
He had 9 operations and spent 2 years struggling to regain some of his strength. He spent months in his backyard, pulling on a makeshift pulley to build strength in his left arm. And the young soldier they thought would never walk again willed himself to walk around and around the block. First it took hours, but Bob Dole never gave up.
I remember one time we were dating, and Bob was down in North Carolina visiting with my parents, and unbeknownst to me, he left his bedroom, went down to the kitchen where my mother was fixing breakfast, and he had a towel over his shoulder that had been wounded in the war, and he said, "Miss Hanford," he said, "I think you should know about my problem." And he showed it to my mother, and she said, "Bob, that's not a problem, that's a badge of honor."
All across this country, Americans are looking for leadership. We long for a president to make us proud, to inspire us in good times and bad. A leader who shares our values and understands that faith, courage, and commitment have made America the greatest country in the history of the world.
It really all comes down to values. What you believe in, what you sacrifice for, and what you stand for.
At a time when our country is crying out for moral leadership, Bob Dole has stepped forward to fight for our values.
Those who cultivate moral confusion for profit should understand this. We will name their names and shame them as they deserve to be shamed. We will contest them for the heart and soul of every child in every neighborhood in America.
Love of family, community, faith. These basic values that have made America great have found a voice in Bob Dole.
The view many Americans see this morning is a sobering one. We are troubled about the direction our country is taking. Our values are under constant assault from our public and cultural institutions. We feel threatened by the random incidents of violent crime. Too many of our schools, which were once passports to opportunity, have become demoralizing places. Welfare has become a misery subsidy, fostering illegitimacy and generations of dependency. And yet the deficit keeps growing, taxes keep increasing, and the government keeps demanding more and more authority over our lives. However, another America is waiting. An America with a strong heart, strong again in heart and sure of mind. And I would like to lead us there.
America is turning to a new leader whose determination helped pass the first balanced budget plan in a generation, and whose leadership will provide economic freedom for every American.
We can cut taxes and balance the budget. No mistake about it. We can cut taxes and balance the budget. The American people want change, not just little change. They want fundamental change. They want radical change. We need a president committed to making our tax system lower, fairer, flatter, and simpler so that ordinary people like you and me could fill out our tax form without a lawyer or an accountant or both.
A commitment to our Republican ideas and values of balancing the budget, cutting taxes, reducing the size of the federal government, and returning power to the states. But then, Bob Dole's commitment to our Republican ideals, like leading the fight for President Reagan's tax cuts, have always inspired our party.
I want to express my deep appreciation to Senator Dole for the indispensable role that he has played. And Bob, from the heart, I thank you.
These times demand a conservative leader who can get things done for America. These times demand Bob Dole.
There's a fundamental difference in our beliefs. The president thinks the government ought to do it. Let the government do it. We want to return power to the states, back to the governors, back to the legislatures.
The experience to change America. True welfare reform that puts people to work, fighting for the toughest drug enforcement in our nation's history. Abolishing parole for violent criminals. Mandatory sentences for those convicted of committing a crime with a gun. And appointing conservative judges who will end a liberal judicial policy. Despite our triumph over communism, the world is still a dangerous place. Defending our freedoms takes experience, maturity, and courage. And no one is more prepared than Bob Dole.
We have certain priorities in America. One is our strength as a nation. We must never be reluctant about our greatness or ashamed of our national strength. And when we take our revolution to the White House in 1996, we will vow that American foreign policies will be determined by us, not by the United Nations.
Americans have always looked to their president to embody the hope of the American dream. To keep alive the flame of destiny for the next generation. Our next president will lead us into the next century, and one man stands head and shoulders above the crowd.
My friends, I have the experience. I have been tested and tested and tested in many, many ways. I am not afraid to lead, and I know the way.
A brave young man who went off to war. He gave so much for his country, but all along, he has only sought to serve his country even more. Bob Dole embodies the courage and character that is the essence of our American spirit. Now he stands ready to lead an American renewal.
We should do it for ourselves. We owe it to our children. We must act to be worthy of the gift our ancestors have sacrificed so much for, to ensure that the next century will dawn on a new beginning of American greatness, prosperity, and freedom. Let us do it together. Let us begin today. God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
He steps forward, ready to lead like few men in our nation's history. This courageous man who understands so much about the privilege and price of what it is to be an American. A man every American will be proud to call President of the United States, Bob Dole.